What's up guys, Apoth here with Gravitas Create. Today I want to show you how to take a sample pack and turn it into a sound pack that you can play on the fly and really improvise on and get creative with while you're performing live. But I want to show you how to take it from looking at another sound pack. Let's say you downloaded one and you really want to make one but you're not sure how to go about it. I want to show you how to look at the other sounds in that sound pack and really figure out how to go about engineering one to your taste based on the samples that you really like. So what we're going to go through today is we're going to take some of the samples in the sample pack from A&B from Gravitas, and we're going to put those together into a sound pack and really look at each element of the whole production, your drums, your bass, how to make a pad or a melody line and create all your effects, and even including risers and other stuff like that. Once we get done with that, we're going to mix the sound pack down a little bit, and then I want to show you how to export everything into a project file that someone else can download from you and install and have no problems and go and play it live. Let's get started.
Okay, so let's take a look at the sound pack that I made already from the sample pack and see what all we have in it. I'm just going to run through some of the sounds here. So here's our kick. I've got two other distorted kicks. They're really kind of fuzzy sounding. And then a clap. It's got a bit of reverb on it. And sort of a high-pitched snare sound, and it modulates some. And then a little hi-hat. Then we've got, up at the top, there's a sort of a bass pad sound. And then another sort of weird fuzzy sound. Both just two atmospheric sounds to get everything going. And then there's the main bass sort of beats. And another version of it with a different pitch. And then a third bass that's a bit different, sort of a sub drop sort of sound. And notice there's two of them there. One of them sort of has a filter going down, and the other one, the filter opens up. The other two buttons we've got the two sort of Nero resampled basses from the pack. And it's got a little bit of reverb on it just to give it some space. And then the other one is another switching button that's got two other basses on it. And then lastly, we've got a sort of a riser or just a transition effect to get everything sort of tied together and introduce new parts. And again, lots of reverb and some ping pong on that to give it more space and keep movement going. So that's the sounds that are in the pack already. What I want to do is sort of create a new pack and just sort of go through each one of these sounds and give you an idea on how to make something new from looking at another pack as an example. So we're going to go ahead and keep this at 100 BPM like this project already is. What we want to do is create a new MIDI track to build our pack from. So insert a MIDI track, okay, and then we'll go ahead and go to drums and drop a blank drum rack on that track. So you've got a ton of cells here. All we want to deal with is basically one sound per button, and I know that seems like with 16 buttons that it might be kind of limiting, but that's part of the beauty of making a sound pack. Of course, you can make it with more if you want to. You can do 32 or even 64 if you have like a launch pad or some bigger piece of equipment like that, but I like to keep them to 16. That way it's just very simple to get in and play, and it's not hard to remember where everything is. So now we have our drum rack here. I like to do a couple things to set up. First thing, I'll click over here and open the chain view, and then I'll go ahead and turn on the input and output so we can see where our choke groups and other stuff is. go ahead and turn on your return and your send. The send won't show up until we put something in there, but let's go ahead and turn it on anyway. Next thing I like to do is set up a sidechain channel, and we may end up not using it, but it's good to have it anyway. So right click and create a new return chain, and then we'll rename this with Command R and just name it SC for sidechain. Then you want to turn that speaker on it off so it doesn't actually send out any audio, because we're just going to send audio to it and use it as a sound source. So turn that off, and then I'll generally just create two other return chains, one for reverb and one for delay, just kind of like you see in the main live set. So we'll name the first one reverb and the second one delay. One other thing that I'm a huge fan of is coloring things. Whenever I hear different sounds, I think of different colors, so to me, it makes more sense to name and color things appropriately so you can find stuff in your project easier while you're working. So I'll just go ahead and change these to the colors I normally have them. Okay, so let's start off by going back to the other sound pack and looking at what the percussion section looks like. So we've got one main kick here that's sort of just a thumpy kick. If you look at the simpler here, it's pretty much just on one-shot mode, and there's no other processing going on with it. Generally what I'll do if I'm trying to recreate something in a sound pack that I've seen is just click through the simpler, or sampler if that's what's on there, but mainly a simpler. Just go through the controls and look and see what's turned on and notice what everything looks like. That's probably one of the easiest ways to recreate something, is if you just sort of use it as a template. So nothing's really changed in here, it's just the basic sample, and I think I did that because I liked the sound. It wasn't something I felt I needed to change. I probably just adjusted the volume here, but that's about it. So let's go dig into the Gravitas pack from A&B, and let's look through the drums. And when you're looking through samples, generally when I find a sample pack, I'll go through it and just sort of audition stuff and see what all I actually really like. And whatever sticks out at me at first, that's generally what I'll use. Okay, so this one here, I like sort of the dusty quality on it. So just drag it into C1 here. Let's lower the volume until we see it hit about somewhere between -6 and -12. So let's drag it down a bit. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now, on the other sample, that was on one-shot mode, but this has a really long tail on it, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of control that. So let's turn it to classic mode, and you'll want to make sure it's on mono, so one voice, and it's not on loop mode because you don't want your samples looping unless you intend for it to. On a kick, you probably don't want that. So let's adjust the release until we find something we like. Okay, we want a nice tight sound. What is nice is now that it has a short release, that means you can play it more dynamically. So if you lay into the button, you're going to get that full sound, and that's what we're wanting. We want more playability since we don't have many tracks to work with. Okay, so there's our kick. If we want to mess with it later, we can come back to it, but it sounds good for now. Okay, so generally the next thing I'll look for is the two important elements. So we have our kick, and then we need like either a snare or a clap. So let's look in that folder and see what we find. That's okay. I like that one, it's nice and wide. So let's drag it in there. Now, where I'm placing these buttons kind of depends on how you like to play whenever you finger drum, but I have my own preset layout, so my kicks generally go around this area, and my clap and snare sit in these two slots, just because it's more ergonomic for your fingers, I think. So let's look at the clap, and notice it's loud again too. So a lot of these you're going to have to turn down. So We'll take it also off of one-shot mode, put it on classic, turn the voices to 1. Let's turn that volume down. And you can adjust it to taste. Generally, I'll leave it about a little under the kick, especially if it's a pretty cracking snare or clap. Okay, so and then adjust the release volume some. Generally, I'll put it about, it depends on how fast I want to play it. So like, if I sit at about 400 or 500, notice you lose some of the impact, but that's okay because now you can play it faster. Okay, but one thing I'm noticing there is it's not really that loud at the beginning, so I'm going to go ahead and trim the front of it as much as I love that flam sound and pull it up here. And that gives you a more instantaneous sound. Another thing to look at is you really want to be detailed when you make these. You can just throw it together, but you really want to take your time and edit it correctly. So I'll try to put things at 0 crossings so that they don't clip when the sample re-triggers. So zoom all the way in there and make sure it's on that line wherever the waveform crosses 0, because otherwise you'll get clicks and pops. So cool. So now we've got a basic rhythm section to start with something. That's all you really need to start going. We can fill out the rest of the percussion later. So for now, let's move on. Okay, so now we've got our kick and our clap here. Let's kind of refer back to the A and B pack some, and we'll keep doing this going back and forth. But what we need to find is something, like when I made this, what I really liked was how this sort of, I mean, it's wood blocks, but it's a beat out of it, and if you pitch it down, it becomes a bass. So if I look at that, let me look over here and I'll explain something that I did with this real quick. Like I said, I like to turn effects and everything off when I'm examining these and looking back at what I've done. So first thing I notice is there's a chord on here. If I turn that off, it's just the lower portion. And if you turn it on, it's got the upper volume, so it's sort of an octave double. And now what's also causing that sort of warbly sound is the fact that I've got this on warp mode. So in, I think it was Live 9, now you can warp samples within Simpler using the different warp modes that Ableton has. And that opens up a lot of sound design opportunity. In Beats mode, there's a way to use the playback mode. So what I've got this on is on transients. So it picks up all the little transient tick marks that Ableton would normally use, and it tries to rewarp it based off of that. I also changed the mode from the normal back and forth mode that it does to the straightforward. So it goes from the beginning of the sample and then loops to the end of the sample and then starts over back at the beginning. And since it's on the transient mode, it'll loop until it sees a new transient. What that's going to make is sort of that shifting warbly sound. Let me turn off the chord and let's just listen to the top part of that. So I'm going to pitch this sample up by 12 semitones. And that's under controls and then transpose. I'm going to go back in here and listen to what this sounds like. It adds a bunch of different artifacts into the sound. The other thing is, with the envelope, it normally sits at 100, but if you turn it down to a lower volume, it sort of acts like a gate, especially if you turn it to just the stop mode here. So you could even do something like that. So let's go back. The first thing that I chose when I did this was I was scrolling through all the bass sounds and other sounds until I found something that really caught my ear. And that's the main thing in this sound pack making, is that you want to just go with what your gut tells you. If you find something that sounds really interesting, use it. Let's go back to our new pack here, and let's find something that we like the sound of. We'll try to find something for the drop. It's good to start with the basses. So I heard one back up here that I really liked. Let's go find it again. I think it was this one. There. We're going to use this one. We'll drop that on there. And the first thing I'm going to do with this is, one, turn off the warp mode. We may turn it back on. But for now, I want to put this in classic mode. It is a bass, so set the voices to 1. And then turn the loop off for now and leave snap on. And I'm just going to go through here and play with it until I find something that I like the sound of. And first, let's actually turn the release to like 50, really, really short, so that we can just sort of scrub through this. Volume down. Okay, cool. And then just play with it and see what the percussion you have, see what it sounds like. And see, already I like that, so we're going to keep it. Now again, let's go through in here and find our zero crossing somewhere. Okay, awesome. Now, I normally won't trim things until I get closer to the end of the project, because I may find that I want to use a different part of that sample on another pad. So we'll leave it like it is for now. This is at 95 BPM, and it's an E, apparently. So we will go ahead and change our tempo to match that, or we could try warp mode. So for now, let's do 95, and then we'll work the rest of the sound pack around that BPM. Cool. See, so that sounds really funky already. We'll mess with processing it later, but let's go ahead and make our second tone. So we could just play that all day long and it sounds really cool, but let's get some variation. So if you click this cell and drag it to the next one and then use Alt, it makes a copy of it. So now we've got 2 of them. Also, let me stop here and point out something that I found extremely frustrating when I didn't understand how drum work worked as I was first creating sound packs. I used to wonder why the view would switch around all the time to different samples, because when you're working on stuff, sometimes you want to stay on the same one. There is this little button here that is the auto selector. You can turn that off and keep it on that same sample no matter what you press. So that's extremely handy, especially when you start working with effects and you're still trying to press other buttons. So for now, let's leave it on, turn it back on, and let's work with our second bass sample. So what I'm looking for here is something to follow what this first button does, not a button, but the button. The other thing that I'm noticing already, I try to avoid having the different buttons start on the same note. So notice this one is, I'm not sure what that note is, but we can find out. Let's see what it starts on. If you go over to Audio Effects and go to Tuner and drag and drop just even after the whole drum rack and press the button. So it's starting at B. So I don't want that first one to match the second one. I want to put it at a different spot that gives me a different tone. Let's put it on this right here, this E. Okay, and then we've got a click, so let's clean that up real quick. Just quickly find your zero crossing, plop it right there. Okay, so now we've got a B and an E. That to me is really important. If you keep the same notes on everything, that reduces the playability of the pack, because if you have short tones, you can really play around with different combinations of those buttons instead of holding the button and playing that whole line. Now we've got our 2 basses, but you'll notice they can be played at the same time. That's not what we want. So we need to add those to what's called a choke group. the same way with my colors. Let me go ahead and color everything. So the percussion I generally use in the red zone over here, because to me percussion is the real heart, blood, and beat of the sound. So my kick always gets that dark red. Clap is a bit lighter, so we'll put it up here. And then basses to me, for some reason, are purple. I don't know why. That's just what I see. So I'm going to go ahead and make both of those purple. Okay. And now if you look in this section, you can see this from the input-output button that we drag and drop, or that we opened up earlier. That opens up the receive, play, and choke features of the drum rack, and we want to put these on the same note. Generally, I'll put basses on 8. Again, personal preference. You can use whatever you like. So now, each one stops the other. And now we've got, with just 2 buttons, a really cool way to play some awesome bass and not have the same thing going all the time. So let me open up my chains by double-clicking real quick. Okay. Let's look at release time. So this first one, I want to adjust the release so that I just get the first note. Notice right there you start to hear the E come in. I don't really want that, so whenever I hear that, I'll just back off. Okay, so right about there is good. Let's change that back. Nice clean tone, but not so clicky as it was before at 50 milliseconds. Like, we want it to have some tone. So let's go to the second one and adjust the release for the first tone we hear here. And there's that click from the second E. Now we've got our 2 tones. Cool. I want to keep this playable, so you can either hold the buttons or play them fast. But adjust your release times and everything to get them where you really want them. Okay, so there's our basic bass tones. We may add a third one, but for now let's just keep it to 2 because that's enough to rock the party. Okay, so let's go back to the first pack, and this pack is already sounding a lot different, but that's okay. We're just going to keep looking at what this pack has in it and sort of go with the same guidelines and make something new. Let's fill out our percussion section. In this one we've got the kick, clap, snare, little hi-hat pitter-patter thing, and then 2 distorted 808 sounds. I really like using 808s and big, long, bassy sounding kicks because they give you an opportunity to play more without even using the bass buttons up here. So you can use these to carry on a beat. So that's why I like to keep those. You don't have to have them, but it just makes it more fun because you get more playability out of the pack. Okay, so we're back on the new sound pack here. Let's let's fill out these 2 because we'll worry about these later. Let's fill out our hi-hat and our snare because we've got a clap and a kick. So if we go back into the pack over here, let's go up to the drums again. And we'll go to the snares. We just want something that sounds a lot different than the clap that we have. That's real clean, it's wide. We want something that has more, maybe even a higher tone to it, just something that gives it more variety. I really like that bottle cap clap, but we need more of a snare tone. But let's go ahead and drag that on here because we might be able to use that sound and layer it. So we'll come back. Here's some nice snare sounds. I really like the tail on that one. I also like how that one has more of the sort sort of a tail that sounds like water to it. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and keep both of these. I'll drag them both down here. And we may end up using this one for something else later. Let's try and layer up this bottle cap sound that I like the end of. Let's trim it up closer first. Okay, and remember, reduce your volume. Okay, let's see if we like this front part. Like how that has more of a lopsided feel to it, because if we use that in the beat, it gives it more of a swingy feel, and this bass already feels kind of swingy to it and funky. It just has more of a cool sound to it, but it may not need that long of a beginning, so let's put it right here. Same way with the other samples. I don't want the whole sample to play all the time, so I'm going to put it on classic mode instead of one shot. And you can use one shot mode and just adjust the fade out, but I think using classic mode is more controllable than just having the attack and decay envelope. Like we've done with other stuff, play with it and pull the release back until you hear what you like. Let's get more of the snare sound that we have over here. This one on snare 6, let's drag it in. And I'm going to go ahead and adjust the volume because I know it's going to be loud. So I'll pull it down. Okay, so I really like the tail on that, and like the high fizziness to it as well. And they sound pretty good together. Let's group up this one that's on the button we need. Right click it and group, or you can hit Command G. And that's going to turn this simpler into an instrument rack. And what we'll do now is click this to open the chain up. And then we'll just go, I'm going to delete this one because of how Ableton works. I'll just delete it. And then we'll go back up here to the sample pack, and drag this one into our instrument rack now. Now we've got both of those sounds on one button. I'll readjust the volume. Now let's also, our snare here, let's adjust its release. It started at 50 milliseconds. Let's back it all the way to 60 seconds and pull it back. See, right there, we start to lose some of the body of that snare. Right there is where I like it. So now we've got both volumes, both samples in here. And we don't have too much of an increase in volume, so we'll keep it how it is. Let's look at some filtering. On this one, and I'm going to use the solo button here. I'm going to get rid of some of the low end because we don't even really need it. And again, I prefer just listening to things as you play with them and go from there. Generally what I'll do, I like 2-pole filters versus the 4-pole or 12 decibel per octave. I like 2-pole filters more, they let more sound through. So unless you're trying to get surgical, I like 2 poles. That's just me. So I'm going to take this frequency and do it, like I'll pull it back to lower as the high pass, and I change this to high pass here because I'm trying to cut the low end out. And I'm going to just pull this back until I start to hear the sample. And then I'll go until I hear all of what I consider the sample to be. And notice right in here is where you stop hearing any difference. Right about 400 or so is where you hear that little bottle cap noise. So let's cut about that much, okay? And we'll pull up the resonance just a bit. And now it gives it some of that body back, and then we'll pull the filter back up. Okay, so there's that. Let's do that also for the snare here. and get rid of some of the low end on it. The more low end we have room for our bass and our kicks and other big elements, the better. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to solo this one now and do the same thing to it. Change our filter to a high pass. Notice the body of the snare is about right there. Let's keep a little more low end from it because I really like that sound. So we'll just trim off that much. Okay, you don't want to peak this resonance too much because then you'll end up with really big pitch spikes in where that is. Let me show you what that looks like. If you go over to Audio Effect and just grab an EQ8 and drag it to the end of this sample here and play with this resonance and look at what it does to the sound. It starts putting this real boxy hump right here, and you don't want to have it too high. So just keep it pretty low. Next thing I want to do is compress these together. And I like to use glue compressor and just drag that in here. Not at the end of the chain. You want it inside the drum rack cell. So after this instrument rack. Okay, and what I'm going to do is just pull the threshold back until I see the compressor kick in. And when it hits about between 5 and 10, that's generally where I'll leave it. I'm not looking at this number down here or even really any of these numbers yet. I just want to get some compression to glue them together and give it some snap. So now we'll turn it back up. If you look at our volume, it dropped, so we'll pull that back up some. And now, again, I'm not looking at the makeup gain. I'm looking up here to see what the level's hitting at. Let's look at a hi-hat. We'll move this snare out of the way and mess with it later. So if we go back into the Gravitas folder here, let's look for a hi-hat sound. So if you look through here, there's not really too many hi-hats. There's just a couple of shakers and this hi-hat. And while those sound really cool, I don't really think any of those are what I want. So what I'm actually going to do is go down here into the drum loops folder and just sort of skip through some of these. I really like how those sound. So I'm going to use this whole loop and just cut out something out of it. Okay, so let's first take it off the one-shot mode, put it on classic. Again, with long samples, whenever you're scrubbing through, I like to pull the release down so you can just not have it play the whole time. And that's a bit loud for my ears. It's kind of overpowering the other drums. So let's pull the volume down. We can always bring it back up if we need. I'm going to turn this off of warp mode because I'm not going to use the whole sample. Okay, and I'm going to turn the loop off as well. What I really like is this part here. And so I'm going to trim almost all of this back. I'm going to leave this last little tick here and see where snap cuts that. Okay, since we are going to use part of this as a looped portion, not really looped, but just an in-time portion, and our drum rack is at, or our project's at 95 BPM, let's actually put this on warp mode so that it does fit 95. If you turn that off, you can hear the speed difference. Okay, so let's leave warp on for now, and let's also go ahead and chop this. Normally, like I said, I don't crop my samples until I'm done, but I'm pretty certain that this is what I want. So I'm going to hit right click and hit crop sample, and that'll crop whatever we had. And if you really, like I said, you want to get surgical with it, I don't want this to be on the end of the file when I go to export all this, so I'm just going to pull this back and recrop. And then we just have this audio. Next thing, I don't really like the release on that. I think it's too short. I really want it to ring some, so. Okay, so there we go. You'll notice I played through a lot of different stuff. Most of my time spent designing these sound packs is actually playing through to make sure it plays in different ways. So I try out different patterns while I'm playing and generally just get variation to make sure I'm getting true mileage out of the sound because I want it to sound really, really good. So make sure you're doing that. Let's turn the voices to 1. And while we're on it, I'm going to go back to my other sounds and make sure those are also mono. So open this up, double click. Yeah, let's set these all to mono. That way it uses less processing power. The less processing power, the better. Ooh, this one's on 6. Turn it down. Okay. So there's our hi-hat. Now, like I did with the others, let's cut out some of the low end because we don't need all that. Now, this sample, I do like some of the mids that it has, so I don't want to cut it all out. But on the hi-hat, we're going to get surgical, turn it to 24 decibels per octave, high pass, and pull it down. Now, one thing I notice as I'm sweeping this, I like to make my hi-hats vary a lot. So let's go back to the other pack again, and let's see what this one did. Notice it's high pass pretty heavily, but I think I want some difference on this one. Also notice it has a ping pong delay. Let's try and add some space to this hi-hat on our new pack and see what we can do. Okay, so we'll go back to it. What I want to do here is actually go into our controls, and I want to make this filter move like this. So it gets more movement to it. And I'm noticing that I like the sound all the way up to about 1.8 kilohertz and down to about 400 or 500. Let's put it about halfway. So that's going to be like between here and here, about right here. And what I'm going to do is turn on the LFO, and that will give us a way to use the LFO to drive the filter. And so if you turn it all the way up, what I find it's easiest to turn it all the way up so you can hear what it's doing at an extreme. And notice it sounds the same. That means we need to turn re-trigger off, because right now every time the LFO kicks in, it's re-triggering the LFO. So we want to turn that off so it flows freely. See how that works? Okay, and then let's pull the amount to the filter down a bit. So there's less variance. Okay, and then pull the resonance up to give a little bit of a hump. And it sort of talks to you. It's if you go real extreme with the resonance, you can get sort of a mock scratching effect, like a turntablist. And we may leave that. Let's pull it down a little bit. See, that sounds really cool. So we're going to go ahead and leave that. Okay, so let's try and let's go back again. Let's reference back to our other sound pack here and see what else we had in the rhythm section. So we have kick, pitter patter, snare, clap, and these two low hits. Let's get something to match our bass that we have. So if we go back to our pack here, we've got that B and the E there. So we need to find something, some kind of bass tone, or maybe even an 808 if there is one in here. We already used that other one, so let's try to find something else. Okay, so here's that 808 from the other pack. Keep in mind, you can repitch anything as you need to. So what we're looking for is just some kind of bass tone that's a big hit. There's a good one. Okay, so that rubber band there, we can use that. So let's drag this down here to this slot. Okay. Has some nice sort of bit crush sound to it. And we'll drop the volume a little bit like we had before. And now we need to tune it. So the main note in this line, as you can see from the title of this, and if it's not labeled, like I said, you can use the tuner to find it, but the low note is generally going to be what key it's in. So this one, let me scroll over. It's an E. So we want to put this, which is at a C, at an E. So let's go to controls, and we don't have to mess with the pitch envelope yet. We'll mess with that in a moment maybe. Let's pitch it up to an E. So that's going to be C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E. So 4 semitones. Now notice that's kind of high because we want it to be really subby. So we'll drop that down an octave, and you can do that two ways. You can either change it to -8 because that would drop it down. So 4 minus 12 is -8. So, but now that sounds kind of funny. So I don't know if that sample will actually work like we want it to. We do know that we have a B here, and B is just 1 semitone away from C. So we can get away with using it as a higher sub kick. So let's pitch it down 1 semitone. Was that the right thing? Okay, so let's use this one as our high kick here. And so I'm going to go ahead and move it over to this slot and get it out of the way of our low one. So, okay, now because that doesn't really have any sort of a kick quality to it, let's do some more layering and group this up. And I'm going to go back into our samples down here, and let's look for another kick that has a really short impact on it. We don't want anything long. Like this kick has more of a vinyl dust quality to it. We want something that's really short and snappy. So that one's pretty good, but it also has a bit of a tone to it. So we'll try it and see how it works. So let's drop it into our sample slot here in the instrument rack. And now let's solo it and see if we can figure out what pitch it is. Okay, so if you look over here at the tuner, it's saying it's an A flat. Let's pull the volume down some. So from A flat, let's go up to a B. So that's A flat, A, B flat, B. So 3 semitones. Okay, no, sorry, that's wrong. 2 semitones. Okay, so now we've matched this kick, even though it's got that tail on it, to our sample in here, so it should work. Okay, next thing, we don't really want them to overlap, so we're going to take the rubber band sound and we're going to increase the attack on it until we hear the kick transient come through. That's a bit far, but see, when you hear it, now you can really hear the kick come through. Okay, I'm going to try and sidechain the sub kick part to the main kick and see if we can make it duck out of the way more. So let's drag on a compressor. You can use glue compressor, but for sidechaining I tend to like the regular compressor, even though it gets clicky sometimes. Turn sidechain on, and now if you go into input, we want it from our drum rack track here. So drum rack. Now if you go through this list, it's going to get a little confusing, but if you look here, here's the C rubber band here, and here's the other kick. So kick 8, we want it as post effects. And so now here's where that part where I was talking about keeping the thing locked on itself. It won't really matter for this, but when you start sidechaining other parts, you want to turn that off so it doesn't move around. In this case, we don't have to. So let's click the headphone part, and there's our sound. Okay, that monitors and lets us see what the sound is that's coming through. Let's solo this guy and turn the cue back on. So we have the right kick. Just make sure it's on the right one. Now, I'm just going to just turn the ratio up a little bit, maybe like 9, 10 to 1, maybe 7. Let's start there. The way I like to set this is to go and look. You have the different views down here. Here's the collapsed view. There's the transfer curve view, and then the activity view. I find the activity view is easier to set this. You can do it by ear, but what I like to do is take this and then drag the threshold down and see where the peak, this is the incoming signal from the kick, and here's how much the compressor is dipping our volume here. I want to make those two touch. See that? And see, now you start to hear where the kick is overriding our bass. And if you overlap them real hard, you'll get a gated sound, but that's not what we want. Just make them touch. Okay, and then our release, we really want to let, actually our attack, we really want to let the transient through. So we want it to kick in pretty much immediately. And if you see that small little hump, that's where the transient's sitting. So let's pull the release down even further. Now you're going to hear a click, so pull it back up. That's just part of the newer compressor. It clicks and it's annoying. Okay. Something else we can also try is turn the envelope to linear. Okay, we'll just leave it on log for now. So now if we go back over here and turn this off of solo, we get a nice clean transient and the bass. Okay, what I'm noticing there is my kick. I think the sample is too short on the release. Yeah, it's way short. So let's adjust this like we did the other samples. Solo it out and turn up the release. until you hear that tail. And then unsolo it and make sure the side chain didn't override it. Okay, cool. So there is our higher subby kick, and we'll make a different one since we couldn't make that sample work for the lower one. Okay, so let's try and make another subby kick. I really want one of those because I want to show you something that I really like to do. So let's go back into the basses and find another different bass sound. We're looking for a solid tone. Okay, so right there I noticed that has a long tone. And what I'm immediately thinking is that even though this is sort of a reversed wave where it builds into the tone, there's no reason we can't turn this around. So let's try and use that. I'm going to drop it on this cell. And this robo bass here is an A. And we needed to drop it down to E. So let's see how we can work that. We're going to turn warp off, put it on classic mode, turn off loop, voices to 1, and I'm immediately going to right click and hit reverse sample. Thankfully that's something they added in the newer versions of Live with the new sampler. You used to have to go into sampler to reverse the sample and then change it back. You don't have to do that anymore. So let's go a little further in. Let's go down here, because this is actually where the start of the wave was. And we're going to look for more of where the waveform is more solid and find a zero crossing there. Zoom real far in. Got it pretty close. Okay, and Ableton thinks that's about it, so we'll leave it there. Okay, pull our release time down. Pull that volume down. Perfect. Okay, let's try pitching it, and let's pray that this works. So, from A down to E, let's see. We can just use the tuner. So, let's go down. And see, that has a way better tone to it. Okay, I really like that. I think it's got a bit too much high-end content to be subby, so let's turn the filter on really quick and pull the filter down. Perfect. Yeah, that's what we want. Now, let's do sort of the same thing that we did with the other one and put the same kick on it. Let's group this up. And we'll just go into our other sample since we already adjusted it. Right click and copy this part. Go back to our other one and just paste it in. Okay. Now notice this is also now still at a B. And you can kind of hear it doesn't sound right. So we need to change that. Let's solo it. Use our tuner again. Okay, so now it's at an E, but if you look, it's hitting really on the far side over here where it's minus a few cents. So let's push it up a little bit. And see, it's still showing like minus 24. So we'll bump it up pretty far. Let's put it up by 40 cents. And see, now it hits more in the middle at a true E. And And then let's also look at our other sample over here and see where it's sitting. Okay, so it's at -9. That's not too bad, because you don't want to, it didn't have to be exact. But let's pull the kick down to match it. And you kind of got to be fast with your eyes because the frequency changes so quickly. But see, that's it's hitting it like -10. So we're going to leave it there, and now let's turn it back on and see how it sounds. Okay. Now, we need to, on this one, I think we're going to pull the release back more. Actually, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to change the sustain mode to just -infinity and treat it more like a real kick would be. Because we're just looking for the click. And then we'll play, instead of with the release, we'll play with the decay, so that when you press and hold the button down, that's what the sound is going to be like. And then you can hear a little bit of air at the end of that. And I kind of like that. Let's resample this. So we haven't resampled anything in this pack yet, but we're going to do it now. So what you want to do is right click up here and create a new audio track. And I'm going to rename this ASP Resample. That's just my naming convention, just so I can find my files. And turn the audio from resampling. Now, remember we have our limiter on our master over here. We're going to turn that off for the moment so that we don't increase our sample, because then we'll have to mess with it more later. So you just kind of have to turn it back on and off. You can actually set that to a knob or a macro on a button if you want to, even to turn it on and off. And turn the actual output volume on this off, and then turn the record channel on. And if you press Command, you can turn both channels on depending on how your preferences are set up. And let's go back over here, and we're going to hit record. And stop. And now we've got our actual sample. So we'll drag this in here, and we're going to turn these other ones off for now. Trim this up. Zoom all the way in. Voices to 1. Especially on this, you want it on one voice. Turn warp mode off, because if you have warp on, it's not going to let you do the pitch shifting stuff that we were doing. You can turn the filter off now because we already filtered it how we wanted. You can turn the LFO off too, just reduce processing power. Now turn your pitch envelope back on. So I think our numbers were +24, 60 seconds, 0 sustain, and like we'll do 225 on the decay. And let's see. Okay, we need to change our release here. Back up to about 5 or 6 seconds. And notice when we resampled it, how it gives you more variance in the tone. I want these two to choke each other. This one I'm not too concerned with because it's a much shorter sound, but this one has a really long release on it. So I'm going to choke it to the kick, and I generally will put the kicks on 16. So now we can get more, it's more playable. It's not sitting in the way of each other. Okay, perfect. That's what we want. Right, so where do we go from here? We've got all of our kicks and our percussion going. We've got 2 basses. So let's listen to that real quick. Quick level check. Let's look at what Yeah, that one's a little low, so let's bring it up some. And since we have this as a group here, let's just bring the overall volume up. I'll collapse that, and then I like to put a utility at the end of it. That way we don't have to mess with the volumes. Let's just bring it up a little. Try to match that one. Now notice here's again, let's turn off our follow. So the auto follow, turn that off. And now it'll stay on this when we press other buttons. Okay, and I also want to turn on the choke for this third kick as well, and that's going to be 16. Cool. So one thing I noticed with the basses is that I want a third note. The way I like to look at this is if you've already got something that's a bass line to it, hear that top note up there? That's going to be an E an octave above this one. So let's take this one again and copy it over. And we're going to find a part where we have that higher E. So if you look at the waveform right here. And what's cool is this one has more like faster, it's got faster notes going on here. So let's move this over. Yeah, so now we've got sort of a line that we can go up or down. And that gives us more playing variability. Let's get in here and find that zero crossing. Well, that's not really a zero, but we'll get back here a little bit. We'll just have to work that for now. It's kind of where the notes shift over, so we'll try that. Okay, so now let's see what that sounds like. Cool. So next thing, let's also adjust the release on this one like we did with the others. We just want to avoid having any of the other part play. So now we can do other beats with that. That's another thing I like to do. I like to do what I call a house check, or something that's 4 on the floor that you can play more than just that set BPM with the pack. So that having those 3 notes allows us to play different bass lines than just what's pre-programmed. So now we've got our bass figured out, most of our, or all of our percussion pretty much. We could put something in this empty slot in E1, but we'll keep that for now just for an effect if we need more space later on. Space gets kind of precious with the 16 buttons, so feel free to move stuff around if you need, but sometimes you may end up changing it and finding something that works better. So we've got our drop. We need a lead in, or like something to do with the intro. So how do we go about doing that? We can go a couple ways. We can either do like a pad sound, or since this is kind of funky sounding, let's try and fit a pad with some kind of movement over it. And let's actually refer back to the other sound pack and see what's happening in it. So up here, we've got this pad. And this return, like sort of a callback to it. And while that's really dissonant, it sort of leads as a resolution when you press this button. This resolves from this sort of dissonant minor key back down into the main note of the whole pack. So that note. So let's make something that's kind of like this. Let's look at this pad here. It's a bit calm for what I want. Okay, so that has some nice sounds to it. Let's try and work with this one. Oops. Let's put it on classic mode. Turn the release down while we're playing with it, and we'll turn it back up a little bit. Pull the volume down. Now, if you look at the tuner, it says C minor, and it's eventually going to pop up as a C over here. So it's not exactly showing, but it's showing like G and E flat, so we know it's C minor, and we're mainly in like E major almost. So let's see what we can do with it. C down to E, or actually up to E. See, so that actually works in there. And actually the whole pad almost works with it. So what we're going to do is split it up into two different chords. So we've got one here, and then the second one hits right here. So let's pull this back, and while we're at it, we'll pull it off of warp mode, because we don't really care that it's not really got too much of a beat to it. So we'll just pull this back, and we're going to leave loop on this time, and actually leave the voices up, because we may put an octave in front of it to make it give it a bigger sound, or a lower sound even. So leave loop on, and hear that click. So let's just loop it, and it doesn't really matter where, you just kind of play with it and see what you want. So I'm going to do that. Turn the fade up and make it smooth out. So yeah, now we've got a good pad sound. Okay, and like I said, let's try and put, under MIDI effects, let's put chord in front of it and bump it down by an octave and see if we can make it broader and see what it sounds like. And see, that's a much fuller sound. Let's try bumping it up an octave too. I think that actually sounds pretty cool. Let's pull the amount down on the top so it's not so bright. And pull the amount down on the bottom too. Cool. Alright, so collapse that. Now we've got our first pad. Let's go ahead and copy this one over to this second slot here. Okay, and now we're going to move our whole marker over to the second sound. And I'm just sort of guessing it stops there, but we'll find out in a moment. Yes, that's what we want right there. And now I will get in here and let's try to find the start. Right about there. And just out of curiosity, let's see what's on the end of this. That shifts to another. Yeah, so we don't want that. We just want it on this one. Okay, and our other settings we can pretty much leave the same for now. We'll mess with the releases in just a moment. Let's go back to the original pack. We've got two pads. And then on this pack, I've actually got two other parts for a bigger lead. On this one, though, I think let's keep it simple and just make it match 3 and 3. Let's just copy that third chord over since we already have it, and we'll move the snare out of the way. We'll come to that later. Let's move this one over and copy it. And we're going to set this to match that other part. And this should be that third chord here. So yeah, now we've got 3 chords to play with. Let's see what's at the end of this one. Yeah, okay, it resolves back to the first chord, so that's not what we want. Let's put it back here. And I'm going to turn off the chord for just a moment on this so I can hear what it's doing. Because when you've got a chord going and you have warp mode off, these are playing at different speeds, so I can't hear exactly what the change is. So I'm going to turn the chord off and listen to it at the normal octave. I'm just checking to make sure there's no overlap from this chord down here. And then I also see that this starts over here, and I hear some of that other chord in there, so I'm going to pull it forward until I don't hear any of it. Now, you hear the clicking at the beginning. Let's adjust the envelope on all of these and make it fade in a bit more. So we'll do like 150 milliseconds. Just smooth it out. And then we'll adjust the release to make it about 1 second. And let's turn our chord back on. Actually, I don't like how full that one is on the third one, so I'm going to turn it back off. I won't delete it just in case, but I'm going to turn it off for now. And then let's check the others, set the attack and release times on those. Okay, so we're getting pretty close to building out the rest of the pack. We've only got, without our snare here, we've got 4 slots left to make some stuff with. And now a lot of this we'll mainly use like this one and maybe this one for effects, and then we just need our riser, and then we'll make another effect out of this sound here too. Sometimes I like to take this first E1 slot and put an open hi-hat or a crash cymbal or a ride or something there for more rhythm variance, but it just kind of depends on what I'm feeling at the moment. So let's take a look at the snare and start looking at our other effects. Okay, now what can we do with that is the question. I think I want to do some kind of melodic sort of thing with it. So let's have a note that we can play with. It may be more atonal than anything, but it's still something to give you more mileage out of the pack, especially when we're playing with the subs like. So let me show you a neat little trick. We're going to put a chord on here. And I'm just going to write in some numbers. So like an octave up, maybe a fifth up, maybe that minor, and then maybe even like an octave and a fifth up, and then maybe one above that. We'll just write in some random notes, and then like 10 semitones up. That generally will sound good. Now, if you put random on front of it, maybe behind, but under here, and we're also going to change this to mono So under controls, actually, sorry. Put it on classic, turn your voices to 1. And then we're going to change the mode from random to alt and turn the chance up to 100%. And then our choices is going to be the number of total notes we have. So there's 6 notes here plus the normal note at 0 semitones, so that's 7. And it's not working right, so let's put it after the chord actually. That's still not doing what I want. Okay, so it wasn't a chord that we needed. Sorry, I want to use scale. And so now there we go. So now let's just put in some other pitches in here. We'll go up here. So now we need to make this sound a bit better. Let's run it through an overdrive. And then this is just where I start experimenting. So I know that I like tonal drums and snares and stuff overdriven because it brings a lot of the sound out of it. And so that gives us sort of an ostinato line to play with where it's the same thing over and over, but the rest stays, the rest changes underneath it. And now let's go ahead and start adding some effects. So we're going to put a ping pong delay on this. Turn the dry wet down pretty low. And change it to 1/16. And now I actually don't really want the snare part of it. I don't want that big transient, I want just the tone. So there's one sort of effect / melody line thing. And I'm going to go ahead and move it over to here where it's a bit more playable, just based on hand position. Next up, we need 2 more effects and then a riser, and we are pretty much close to done. Let's look in effects first. That's more of a riser sound. That's got some cool sound in it. And it's also in C minor, so it'll work with what we got. Classic mode, turn the release down. Ooh, that's actually really cool there. That's pretty cool. I'm going to use this as the riser. So I'm going to reverse this in part here. And turn it off award mode. And it's rising kind of slow. I think I want it to rise a lot faster. So what I'm going to do is actually change this to, turn loop off, and change this to a pitch envelope and put it up by 48 semitones, and then change the attack to a pretty long time. Okay, yeah, that's more what we want. Last thing I want to do is I want to resample this, and I want to put some reverb on it. One of my favorite plugins, and I haven't used it yet in this tutorial, is Valhalla Room. Let's try something more like the cathedral sounds. That's a bit bright. Let's try something else. And I'm just going through presets here. You can go through whatever. There we go. Okay, so that's got a nice long tail on it. And now I'm going to resample that. Okay, so when I tried to resample it, I noticed that I didn't loop the tail of this, so it just stops abruptly. So what I actually want to do is turn loop back on and pull it towards like the last end of the sample and turn the fade up some so it just keeps looping more and more. And let's test that out without the reverb on. And that actually sounds pretty cool too. So we'll keep that, and then let's put the reverb back on and resample it. We're going to drop this, get rid of everything in here, and just drop this directly on the cell here. And scoot this up. Just clean your samples up. We've already got the built-in attack, so we don't really need to worry about that, but if you want to, you can. Put it back on classic mode, loop off, voices back to 1, and now we'll adjust the volume down some and change the release. We don't want it too short because you want it to be a pretty long effect, but we don't want that part to kick in. So let's make it a little even shorter. There we go. Because we're still going to put a reverb on this whenever we mix the pack down. Okay, cool. One last thing I'm going to do is, since I want to be able to hold this button down, I want to sidechain that tail to the kick drum. So, speaking of sidechaining, let's go through here and let's turn our kick drum. We're going to send the full amount to send A, which is our sidechain here, and now we can just pick this up whenever we want to use it. Okay, so go over to Audio Effects and grab Compressor. Drop it on the end of this. And then hit Sidechain, turn the little triangle on. Audio input from Drum Rack. And it's going to be at the very bottom, right here, Sidechain Post Effects. And then I'll just do what I did like last time. Go over here and check the threshold. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. Turn your auto select off. That way you can work on the side chain while you press other buttons. And I want to side chain it pretty heavily. Cool. Now let's go refer back to our other pack. And if we look at this riser, it's more of a down, like it's a downshifter instead of a riser, and it's made from a drum loop. But let's look at the effects that are on it. So, first off, there's a ping pong delay. Let's just go ahead and copy this one and put it over on our new one. And see, now that's got more of a tail to it even. Let's change it to 2 beats. Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Something I'm going to do is actually sidechain it with this kick here too. So the second sub kick, because we're going to use that a lot with that sort of sound. But if you try to do that and you don't adjust your sidechain because there's so much sub on there, we're going to have to turn the EQ section on. And let's listen to it and see what's coming out of it. Yeah, so if you look at this here, it's just going to hold it really long. We don't want that. So EQ even more out of it. And do it basically until you see it not holding the compressor open. Okay, so we've got 2 slots left. Let's see what we have to work with. It's generally, if you look in like the drum loops, you can find something to work with. Like that already sounds pretty cool. I like that one. Yeah, let's work with that one. Okay, so I'm going to stick this over here and duplicate this clip so we have 2 to work with like we would in our simpler. I'm going to click this beat here and zoom in. Yeah, see, not quite. Get that transient there. Right click and set 1-1 here and zoom back out. And then move your marker over to it. And then I'm going to drag this all the way back because all we want is just this part. Yeah, that's what we want right there. So now they're off a little bit, but that's just a bit of the humanness in the playing, or if the way it was recorded might have been just a little weird. So you can move them if you want. Let's go ahead and move them. But a little bit of human feel is actually a good thing. So let's actually move this one off beat a little bit. Okay, and then let's adjust this other one. And so it was up here. We're just going to use the first 4 to kind of make it match. Okay, so now we've got both of those. If you right click and crop sample, and do that on this one as well. Okay, now we've got both of these samples to work with. What we're going to do is I'm going to make this an alternating button. Drag one of them on, so onto the slot, and drop it on, and then Command G to group them. Open up your chain list, drop the second one on, and now they're both going to play at the same time. So what we need to do is put in front of the whole instrument rack a random and turn your chance up to 100. The choices, again, is the number of samples that we have here, and put it on alt mode. Just go under key, you select both of them, and pull the big green bar up to C3, and pull the other end of it down to where it's just 1 note wide, like that. And then you take this bottom one and move it up 1. And now it should work. Okay, so that's how we make a sample swap back and forth. And we can stick multiple things in here. And you can do this with musical tones or different phrase lines, all sorts of other stuff. It's really cool. So let's do what we did earlier and put a utility on the end of this. Easiest way to see where to put it is collapse the rack there, and then go under audio effect and utility, and just drop the volume some. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so now we've got pretty much everything, and we need one more sound effect. And I think what I want to do is use these 2 hits. So I'm going to do something similar to what I did earlier with the other sound effect. We're going to copy this one straight over so we don't have to redo all the key mapping. And then we're just going to stick the samples in there. and the second one right there. We'll turn warp off, loop off, voices down to 1. Same on this one. Let's see what that sounds like. Okay, so that's working right. Now we just have to adjust the envelopes on them. Perfect. Okay, so that is our whole sound pack. Now we just need to mix everything down and just kind of get it ready so that it can be played live. Alright, so the last thing I want to show you guys is what to do once you've reached this final stage here and you've got your sound pack built and ready to go. How do you export it so that you can have someone else download it, or you can send it off to somebody to play with, or you just simply want to transfer it to someone? I really like to keep things clean and neat, like I've shown you with all your colors and everything here. That way it's easy. If someone's coming back to look at your sound pack that you've made, it's just easier for them to look at what you've done and see it quickly without having to guess too much. You could be cryptic if you want to, but I like to keep it all neat and clean. So in that vein, let's go through each sample and see if we have any samples that need to be trimmed. So not on that one. Okay, so on this one here, for instance, we did end up resampling this kick, so we no longer need these 2 chains. We'll just delete them and get them out of here. And now notice we have a lot of extra sort of white space, if you will, here. So just right click in the sample view and hit crop sample, and that's going to crop your sample. Okay, let's look at the other sub kick. Okay, so there's just those 2 samples there. So this one, we need to trim that up because we didn't use the whole sample. This just all makes your file size a lot smaller. It doesn't seem like much, but it all adds up. Okay, on this tonal line here, yeah, we can go ahead and trim this sample up. Crop sample. On the hi-hat, I think we already ended up trimming that one, so we're pretty good there. On the snare here, let's check both of these. Right, so we don't need all this extra. We'll crop it out. Okay, and then both of these should already be cropped. And then now, since we've decided fully on what our bases are going to be, just go ahead and crop each one of those. And now a note on that, so really we could have saved some room by using the same full sample for each one of these, but I have found in the past that if Ableton just decides to be finicky, it may lose where the starting point was, and that's happened to me before, and then it's really frustrating to try and quickly find out why your sound pack isn't working because you didn't trim the sample up. So even though we're trying to save space, go ahead and crop it and make it 3 separate files so there's one for each button. And then on the bubbles here, we've got that one and this one. Those are good. And then we'll do the same thing we did to the bases on these pads. We'll go ahead and trim those up. We'll have to expand this again. Go ahead and crop. Do the same thing for this one and the next one. Crop it out, nice clean file. And crop that last one. And then our riser, we resampled it, but we still have some space here, so let's crop it one more time. Okay, alright, so that's everything cropped now. The last thing we need to do is look at all of our crop samples and see about renaming them so that we have a sort of a convention of what's going on within this pack. Even though these may be samples that you already had or samples that you got from a pack, let's go ahead and make it just all look really pretty. So if you right click where the sample view is and show in browser, it'll show you here what's going on. Okay, so you can then rename. And for this case, I'm just going to put what I normally put. So I'll put ASP, that stands for Apoth Sound Pack, and I'll just do _ tut, and then put something like that. And then you can just hold shift and go back and copy this bit right here. with Command C, and then hit enter, and it'll rename that sample. And so what you would do is just go through to each one of these and do the whole same thing again. So some of them are going to show up in imported if they weren't something you resampled, and some of them will show up in your cropped folder if you cropped it. So same thing, just right click and rename. And then this one we'll just do subkick 1. Okay, so once you've cropped and then renamed all of your samples appropriately, then let's go into File and Manage Files, and it'll bring up this window over here for file management. And what I want to do is go to Manage Project, and it brings up this window where it shows you what's in the project. So right now it says this project contains 59.3 megabytes of data. There's 1 live set, 47 media files, there's no missing files, and then there's no external files. You really want to make sure there's no external files. So if you do a collect all and save, that should bring everything within the project. However, this little unused files thing right here is what we're looking for. So it says 8 files, 11.6 megabytes in this project are not used by any of its live sets. So these right here, if you click show, you can go in here and delete these and just hit move to trash. So once you've done that and cleared all those files out, I just like to do a second check and make sure we don't have any erroneous files going around. So I'll hit Manage Files again under File, hit Manage Project, and then it should show you right here that there are no unused media files in this project. And so the last thing you want to do is go under Packing and hit Create Pack. And then it will bring up this and it'll show you what you want to name the pack. And then you just type in your file name there and hit save, and it should go ahead and make a pack that's an ALP file that someone else can transfer and open up and install to their computer, and it won't have any broken links or anything or missing files.